What's up guys, Tommy Bowyer here from Movie Rewind, and today I'll be reviewing Doctor Who Series 12. There will be spoilers in this review, so without further ado, let's get into it. Doctor Who Series 12 premiered on the 1st of January 2020 and concluded after 10 episodes on the 1st of March 2020. It stars Jodie Whittaker as the 13th incarnation of the Doctor, alongside Bradley Walsh, Tosin and Mandip Gill as the Doctor's companions, Graham O'Brien, Ryan Sinclair and Yaz Khan respectively. It is the second series to be overseen by Chris Chibnall as head writer and showrunner, and now that all those details are out of the way, let's get on with the review. So if you saw my Series 11 review about 7 months ago, you will know that I was not a massive fan of that series. I felt it was the worst series of the modern era, and that was mostly down to the writing. I just felt that it weren't up to scratch. It just didn't feel like Doctor Who, and I think that's because you had a lot of writers who weren't actually used to writing sci-fi. So when you put them into a sci-fi heavy show like Doctor Who, they were clearly struggling. So going into Series 12, I was apprehensive. I didn't really know what I was going to make of this series. Obviously, Doctor Who took a year off because that was something that showrunner Chris Chibnall introduced, the idea that the show wouldn't air yearly. Instead, they would take a year break in order to refresh and kind of take on the feedback they received from Series 11. But I was still apprehensive. As I said, Series 11 was not a personal favourite series of mine at all, so I didn't really know what to make of Series 12. And having rewatched it recently, I can say that it is so much better than Series 11. This actually feels like Doctor Who, and there is a lot of stuff in Series 12 which I enjoy, a lot of stuff which I think has potential. However, it is still a bad series of Doctor Who. You know, just because it feels like Doctor Who, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's any good. And for me, there are a lot of limitations that Series 12 has which stops it being a great series. I think that is once again down to the characters. Jodie Whittaker as the 13th Doctor, she's a lot better in Series 12. She's a lot more consistent. She feels like she's more her own incarnation, whereas in Series 11 she felt like she was cosplaying David Tennant and Matt Smith. In this series she does feel like her own incarnation, and there are some great moments involving the 13th Doctor. I specifically like the moment where she sees that Gallifrey is destroyed. Just her acting in that scene without saying a word. That was the Doctor in that moment, and she did a really good job with that. As for her companions, once again, there is too many of them. You know, at the end of Series 12, I still don't really know who Graham, Ryan and Yaz really are. You know, there's just... They're just not fleshed out enough. There's no depth to them. And there are a couple of episodes which do focus on the companions, but they're too few. There's like 1 or 2 episodes, I think, which really start to give some insight into who these people are. There needed to be more episodes like that. But once again, I think Chris Chibnall is too focused on the big picture. I mean, Series 11 was supposed to be the series that you could jump on board with if you've never seen the show before. You know, it had new villains, a new Doctor, new companions. So if you've never seen Doctor Who before, Series 11 would be a good jumping on point. Series 12 is the polar opposite. Chibnall gets into some very hardcore Doctor Who lore in Series 12. Of course, the story arc is the Timeless Child, which is a very controversial aspect of this series, and one when we get to my episode review of the Timeless Children, I'll go into more depth about it. But this is not a series which someone who doesn't know a lot about Doctor Who can watch and enjoy. It is very heavy on Doctor Who lore and changing the history of the show. So I just think that Series 12 has potential. There are some episodes here which I really enjoy, and the characters do feel a bit more developed than they were in Series 11. Having said that though, it's still a weak series. So let's get talking about the episodes which make up Series 12, starting with the series premiere, Spyfall Part 1. It premiered on New Year's Day 2020, and honestly the intro of this episode is such an increase in quality compared to any episode in Series 11. You have spies being killed around the world by alien forces, and the Doctor is recruited by MI6 to try and figure out what's going on. Now that premise is really interesting. Chibnall takes full advantage of the James Bond parody, and it works really well. It's always great to see Doctor Who cross over with another genre, and having like a spy thriller type episode, I just really enjoy it. The companions are actually given something to do. You have Ryan and Yaz trying to infiltrate Daniel Barton's company in order to try and see if he's working with the aliens or not. You have the Doctor and Graham going to find this mysterious O who they're trying to recruit in order to help them solve the mystery. So you've actually got the companions doing something constructive instead of just sitting in the background not doing a lot. So that was really interesting to see. There are a couple of things about Spyfall Part 1 which I think were just kind of included for marketing purposes. First of all, you have two big name actors who appear in this episode. You've got Stephen Fry and Lenny Henry. Now, Stephen Fry basically gave a glorified cameo. You know, he's C, who's this head of MI6, and he's killed within 10 minutes. So it's a very underwhelming death when they could have done so much more with Stephen Fry. And as for Lenny Henry, I think he does a decent job portraying this villainous Daniel Barton, but once again I feel like halfway through the episode they kind of just forget what to do with this character and he's kind of pushed into the background, and I don't know, I just feel like, you know, Henry does a decent performance here. I just feel they could have done more with that character. But for the most part, I enjoy Spyfall Part 1. It's got a great car chase in the third act, which is very gripping. And I have to say, having rewatched it recently, I was on the edge of my seat. Plus, I love the reveal, you know, of O being the master, you know, Sacha Dhawan playing a regenerated master. And it's a great cliffhanger. That's how you do a cliffhanger, because it was shocking. I mean, I remember, you know, after this episode, the internet was going wild because it was just such an amazing cliffhanger. And plus, you've got the Doctor being taken away by the Master. You have the plane that Graham, Yaz and Ryan are on crashing down to Earth. And that is just a great cliffhanger. That is how you do it. You know, that is great writing from Chibnall there. So overall, Spyfall Part 1, it was a fun premiere. You know, it took a great concept, it had an interesting mystery, and it had a good cliffhanger as well. So I really enjoyed this premiere. Spyfall Part 2 is once again a very decent episode and one that was a pleasure to watch. I really enjoyed the scenes between the Doctor and the Master in this episode. I mean, Sacha Dhawan as the Master, he's the standout in Spyfall Part 2. He brings so much chaotic energy to the role and makes a really twisted and unhinged version of the Master, a lot like John Sims' interpretation of the role. So I was there for it. I really enjoyed that more villainous Master being back again. Plus, he's actually very sadistic in this episode. I mean, the scene in which he gets the Doctor to kneel is such a chilling scene, and some great performances from Whittaker and Dhawan in their roles, which really do carry this episode. Plus, I like the fact that this is an episode which plays throughout different time periods. You have the Doctor trying to outrun the Master, and you also have the companions in the present day who are actually given something to do. Once again, 2 episodes in a row, the companions are given something to do, as they have to try and avoid the authorities, which I think, you know, it's great to keep the companions playing a key role in the episode, you know. Saying that though, this episode did set up a lot of great story points for the series. Whether they were pulled off or not in the end is, you know, that's for later on, but they're set up pretty well. I like the idea of Gallifrey being destroyed, and as I said previously, the scene in which the 13th Doctor goes to Gallifrey and sees it in ruins is such a great thing. Whittaker killed it in that scene, and for me that was the first time I actually thought, you know what, this is the Doctor, you know. So yeah, I really enjoyed that that cliffhanger that was going to carry the series on. So yeah, I really enjoyed that moment. In terms of the villains, the Casovans being spies from another dimension who are trying to infiltrate Earth, a very unique villain, that's fair to say. I thought they were defeated in a bit of an underwhelming way, but their design is pretty cool and they do pose a legitimate threat. And I like how the Master is literally just using them. I mean, that's just typical of the Master. He could not care less about them. He's just using them for his own advantage, which I think is pretty funny. Saying that though, there are a few issues with Spyfall Part 2 which I don't think get resolved properly. For one, Daniel Barton. He just kind of disappears by the end of this episode. I mean, once the Master reveal happened, he was kind of a background character anyway, but, you know, once the plan fails, he just leaves, and it's like, well, what happened to him? You know, did he get arrested off screen? Is he going to come back? Like, what happened? He just kind of disappeared. So there's a few things which I think could have been resolved a bit better, but for the most part, I enjoyed Spyfall Part 2. Once again, this two-parter actually gave me a lot of hope for Series 12. So yeah, it was a decent premise. Orphan 55 was a massive letdown. I can't stand this episode. It weren't written by Chris Chibnall, it was written by Ed Heim, and yet it has a lot of Chibnall features. For one, there are way too many characters. We get introduced to all of these side characters and I struggle to remember their names. There's just way too many. There's too much going on. I don't care about these people because the script never actually gives me a chance to get to know them properly. So when they do die, they make it feel like this big emotional moment and I just could not care less. The creature design is quite generic. I feel like the writers thought they'd be a lot scarier than they actually were. And plus, we all knew that Orphan 55 was going to be set on Earth. I mean, I'm not saying that it couldn't have worked because I think it is an important message showing how climate change and human pollution is affecting the world. But I just think they handled it in such a poor way. I mean, by the end of the episode, the Doctor literally looks at the screen and tells everyone why they need to look after the planet. And it just felt, it was a bit too preachy, it was too on the nose, and I'm not a fan of when it's not subtle. And this episode's messaging was just not subtle at all. It was way too obvious what was going on. So yeah, Orphan 55, it was a very boring episode, way too many side characters, the villains were very underwhelming, and the messaging, it just weren't subtle enough for me. Nikola Tesla's Night of Terror is an episode I have mixed feelings about. For the most part, I enjoy it. I just think the third act is a bit of a mess. Now, I really enjoy Nikola Tesla in this episode. The actor gives a really good performance, and I love how they established the fact that Tesla wouldn't actually die a wealthy man. You know, a lot of the inventions he came up with wouldn't actually be able to be made during his lifetime. So I really like how they don't just gloss over the fact that, you know, oh, it was a fairy tale ending for him. They show that in reality, in his lifetime, he was just way too ahead of his time and he weren't going to get rich from it. I also really like the rivalry between Tesla and Thomas Edison, and I also think it's great they show that Edison weren't simply an inventor, he was also very much a businessman who allowed other inventors to work on their projects and then would kind of copyright their invention. So I thought that was a really interesting thing. That's one thing I do enjoy about this episode. It's actually quite a historical episode which could teach you a lot about these two people who I think a lot of people have probably heard of but don't know that much about. So I really enjoyed the kind of history lesson that this episode gives. My only issue is with the ending. You know, the villain I actually think is quite interesting. I like the idea of this alien queen. She is a lot like the Rachnos from The Runaway Bride. Yep, it's pretty obvious that she was heavily inspired by that. But I have to say, she gives a really good performance. I just really don't like when they're protecting Tesla in the tower. I just find it boring. You know, by that point, the episode just starts dragging for me. And so, yeah, I enjoy this episode, especially some of the performances, especially from the actors who portray Tesla and Edison. And I also enjoy the villain. I just think, for me, the third act, it just drags a bit. Fugitive of the Judoon is an episode that I really wanted to enjoy. And when I first saw it, I actually did enjoy it. I thought it was a very impressive episode. It saw the return of a classic Doctor Who villain who we hadn't seen in several years, and I thought that it did a great job setting up the new Fugitive Doctor. However, on rewatch, I find that this episode is literally just set up for the finale. When you actually look at this episode, it's quite boring. Now, the Judoon, they are the best aspect of this episode. I like the idea of the Judoon trying to hunt down a fugitive. I think it's great, especially as the Judoon are kind of intergalactic police. I think it works for them. I also enjoy Jo Martin's performance when she's this mysterious woman called Ruth, who just seems to be just this normal, upbeat person. I really like her. I like her as an actor. You know, she used to be in Holby City and she did a great job in that show. So I really enjoy her in Doctor Who as well. Now, the mystery of who is the fugitive, because the episode tries to say that Lee, who's Ruth's partner, is the fugitive. And it's pretty obvious to anyone watching that it's not Lee they're after. They're obviously after Ruth. So I don't know if the writers thought they were being quite clever, but yeah, no one believed Lee was the fugitive. Everyone knew that it was going to be Ruth. And then I feel like up until the reveal that Ruth is this incarnation of the Doctor that no one knew about, the episode drags a bit for me. It's just a lot of scenes of the Doctor saying to Ruth, oh, why are they searching for you? Who are you? What's going on? Now, the reveal of the fugitive Doctor, it's okay. You know, Jo Martin gives a really good performance and I wish I knew more about this incarnation. But apart from that, they really don't do a lot with her. You know, she takes out the Judoon and then goes away. And that is about it. And that's what I mean. It just feels like she's introduced to kind of say, look, here's this new incarnation of the Doctor. Isn't that cool? Anyway, let's move on. You know, it just felt a bit stupid for me. The companions, they don't do a lot in this episode, which was really disappointing. This was the prime opportunity to give Yaz something to do, because Yaz is a policeman. So surely Yaz could have had more interactions with the Judoon. You know what I mean? Like, there's just... They could have done something with Yaz in this episode, and I just feel like they didn't. Once again, the companions are in the background again. It feels like Series 11. And obviously, Captain Jack's in this episode, and everyone went mental online because John Barrowman returned to the show and Captain Jack's back. But you tell me, what does Captain Jack add to this episode? He delivers a lot of expedition, especially about the lone Cybermen, and don't give him what he wants. And then he goes again. He's literally just there to tell the audiences, this will be important in the episodes that come up, and I'll be back soon. Goodbye. That is literally all he is there for. If you remove Jack from this episode, nothing would change. Any character could have said to watch out for the lone Cyberman. The only reason everyone got excited was because it was Captain Jack. So yeah, I just feel like Captain Jack's cameo in this episode, it just adds nothing to the episode, and I think that's my biggest problem with Fugitive of the Judoon. I was underwhelmed by it, especially on rewatch. Praxeus, much like Orphan 55, is another environment preachy episode with way too many side characters. The only thing I enjoy about Praxeus is the actual Praxeus disease. The effects are good. I will give them credit for that. It did look quite impressive, so yeah, I'm impressed with that. But apart from that, I find this episode very boring. Now, it had potential. You know, the Doctor and companions are in different places on Earth. You know, they've split up, so that was interesting, but they don't really go anywhere with it. As I said, there's way too many side characters. I can't name them, which just shows you how underdeveloped they are. Plus, you know, I suppose the main villains of this episode, apart from the Praxeus disease, are birds who are infected with the Praxeus disease and start attacking the Doctor. But they're easily defeated, so it's like, yeah, don't worry about it, you know. Not that I ever did, because they're birds, you know what I mean? They're not exactly an earth-ending threat. So yeah, I weren't scared of birds killing people. I'm sorry, I just really weren't. Plus, I think that the outcome of this episode is a bit of an anticlimax. I mean, the Doctor easily finds a cure, and then it's dispersed. And then you actually think, well, actually, look, they're going to give this guy, who kind of is introduced as a bit of a wrong-un, you know, he broke up with his husband because he was distant and all this. And then it looks like he's going to redeem himself by sacrificing himself in order to save the human race from this Praxeus outbreak. And then the Doctor saves him at the last second. And I just feel like, why couldn't that character die? Because then he could have had that redemption arc, it would have gone full circle. And then at least the episode, you know, I might not have enjoyed it, but it's like, well, at least one of the characters had an interesting conclusion to his story. But no, they can't let that happen. Obviously, he has to be saved. And it doesn't work in this episode. There's nothing about this episode I enjoy, apart from the Praxeus disease effects. It's just an average episode. It's probably the worst of the Chibnall era. Just way too many side characters and an underwhelming threat, which really doesn't go anywhere. Can you hear me? Now, I'm being 100% honest here. This was the first episode when I really felt like I was getting to know Graham, Ryan and Yaz in particular. This episode is one of the strongest in the series and probably the 13th Doctor's era as a whole. It has some great commentary on mental health. The idea that Ryan's friend is going through some mental health problems which he's afraid to open up about and talk about. The fact that we see in Yaz's past she was suffering with mental health, and we also see Graham's anxieties about whether his cancer could come back or not. So I think it really does focus on these companions and their journey with mental health, and I think it does a great job with that. Jodie Whittaker gives probably her best performance as the 13th Doctor, and I think that's because the villains are really interesting. You have these celestial type beings who really are gods, and the Doctor is so determined to do the right thing that she releases one of these gods because she thinks that this god is being held hostage by the other one, when that's not actually the case. The gods have used her own good-hearted nature against her, and I just think that was really great. It was great to see the Doctor being given villains who actually pose a threat. You know, these aren't misunderstood villains. These are villains who are just pure evil, and I think it really works in this episode. I also like how they're defeated. I think it shows how, you know, it was people who suffer with mental health, they have to talk to others. They have to stand up to their demons, because otherwise it will just go in an endless circle. So I really enjoyed this episode. This is probably the first episode when I started to really like the companions, and I thought Whittaker she owned the 13th Doctor in this episode throughout. Plus, this episode is unique as well. I mean, the use of cave drawings to explain who the celestial beings are, I think that was brilliant. One of my issue with a lot of Chibnall episodes is the fact that there is too much of just people standing around explaining the plot to the viewer. The use of cave drawings, it's something different. It's a good way to deliver exposition because you're actually seeing something unique on screen. So I just wish we saw more of that in other episodes. But for the most part, I really enjoyed Can You Hear Me? It was something different, and the 13th Doctor, one of her best stories. Speaking of great episodes, The Haunting of Villa Diodati. I adore this episode. Maxine Alderton, first time writing for Doctor Who. Russell T Davies, bring her back. She was brilliant. I love dark Doctor Who anyway, and this episode, it just oozes darkness from the writing to the directing to the score. This episode just creates the perfect atmosphere for a haunted house story. I also think the side characters are really enjoyable and likeable. You've got Mary Shelley, you've got Lord Byron. I really like Lord Byron's interactions with the 13th Doctor, this kind of flirty back and forth. I just think it works really well. The companions are, once again, they're given something to do. We see Graham, Ryan and Yaz trying to figure out what's going on with this haunted house. Plus, the 13th Doctor really does stand out once again in this episode. I especially like the scene where the Doctor and companions are all discussing whether the lone Cyberman, which actually turns out to be the ghost in this house, which I thought was a great twist. You know, the companions are like, Captain Jack said, don't give him the Cyberium, and the Doctor's like, what, you think we're all equal? It's like, this isn't a flat surface, you know, sometimes it's mountainous with me at the summit. You know, I thought that was a great moment because it shows that the 13th Doctor might give this outwardly very friendly, upbeat personality, but there are hidden depths to this character. This is still the character which is a Time Lord. They still have all this responsibility on their shoulders, which her companions will never understand. And I thought that that scene in particular was a real highlight of this episode. I also think it set up the idea of the lone Cyberman very well. He has a great design, a design which really does show that the Cybermen are not just machines, they're actually people as well. So I really enjoyed The Haunting of Villa Diodati. It had great side characters, the companions were given something to do, the 13th Doctor had some standout moments, and Alderton gave us a great haunted house story, which I think worked really well. Ascension of the Cybermen. Now, I actually went into this episode with some optimism after the haunting of Villa Diodati, and that went in about 5 minutes. I find Ascension incredibly boring. It's just the Doctor outrunning a group of Cybermen for 50 minutes. The only thing I like about this episode is the Brendan subplot, because it's so out there and odd that it does keep you intrigued. But the rest of this episode is just a generic Cyberman story. I don't think they do a lot with the Cybermen. They introduce the cyber drones, which are floating heads, and they just look stupid. Yeah, I don't like them whatsoever. Now, I actually don't mind the idea of the lone Cyberman, this willing volunteer who thinks that Cybermen should actually be more mechanical. They should be more automated. They should have less human features. I think that's quite an interesting idea. But once again, he doesn't do a lot. I mean, he uses the Cyberium to kind of make his plan work. But yeah, I wanted to enjoy this episode, but I just don't. Once again, the side characters, they're not that memorable. There is nothing which makes them stand out. I don't like Yaz and Graham and Ryan in this episode. I don't feel like they do a lot. They just kind of are along for the ride, and that's about it. Now, obviously, there is the cliffhanger at the end of this episode where we see Gallifrey again and the Master comes back, but we already knew that we were going to see that happen because obviously, you know, the destruction of Gallifrey was teased in Spyfall, so we knew that that was going to come back again, and it weren't a surprise when the Master returned. So yeah, I just feel this episode, it's very poorly paced. I can see what they were trying to do here, I just don't think it works. Now, The Timeless Children. Probably the most controversial finale of Doctor Who in its 60-year history. Now, I don't like this episode, but maybe not for the reasons you might be thinking. The idea of Gallifrey and Time Lords being able to regenerate because atrocities were committed on a child, I actually think is a great idea. It's another reason for the Doctor to detest Gallifrey. But the Doctor being the timeless child, I just don't like it. I like the idea of the Doctor just being an average Time Lord who just woke up one day and decided, I'm sick of the establishment, I'm sick of playing by the rules, I just want to go out and do some good. Because I think anyone who's anyone can relate to that. You know, the Doctor was nothing special, but they wanted to do good in the universe. But now the Doctor is the most important being in the universe because she's the timeless child. And obviously there were loads of Doctors before the first Doctor, William Hartnell. So yeah, I don't like that, especially as they don't really do anything with it. It's not actually explained in a really kind of gripping way. It's boring. It is literally just the Doctor and the Master talking. That is it. Like, not a lot happens in this episode between the Doctor and Master. You just have them chatting and it's boring as hell. And as for the rest of this episode, it's just bad. I mean, you have Graham and Yaz outrunning the Cybermen, and then they're able to get into Cybermen's suits and rescue Ryan and some other people who I can't remember their names. Yeah, their plot is boring. The lone Cyberman, he's easily defeated by the Master, which kind of makes you wonder, you know, we spent 2 episodes, and especially, actually, he was mentioned in Fugitive to Judoon, setting up this lone Cyberman as this formidable opponent, and then he's easily defeated by the Master. So it's like, yeah, I feel that just underwhelms the idea of the lone Cyberman. The Master, he's all right in this episode, I would say. Sacha Dhawan is probably the one highlight, but he doesn't give as good a performance as he did in Spyfall, because obviously he's just delivering the Doctor's backstory for the audience. So this episode is just boring. It is just boring as hell. You've probably changed, you know, you committed the biggest lore change in the revival, and yet you've done nothing with it, Chibnall. You've just kind of revealed it, and then that's it. You don't really do anything with it. And I hate the Time Lord Cybermen. Those designs look stupid. Plus, the Doctor, she never actually is challenged in this episode. You know, she learns all this stuff, And the Master's like, the only way you can escape is if you destroy Gallifrey yourself. But she doesn't even get to destroy Gallifrey. She just gives it to someone else and he decides to destroy Gallifrey. So it's like, the Doctor weren't challenged in this episode. Yes, she found out that she doesn't know who she truly is, but apart from that, she didn't do anything. For most of the time, she was imprisoned in a little capsule anyway. So yeah, I find The Timeless Children, it's a boring episode. It's an underwhelming series finale, and Chibnall made a massive lore change to the show, and he didn't do anything with it. Revolution of the Daleks was the 2021 New Year's Day special, and it is also technically a sequel to the 2019 special Resolution. Now, I enjoyed this episode a lot more on rewatch than I did when I originally saw it, but I still have a few issues with it. Firstly, Jack Robertson's back, you know, the Trump parody from Arachnids in the UK, and he's just such a cartoony character. I can't take him seriously. He's way too over the top. And I don't see why they brought him back because, you know, he weren't exactly great in Arachnids in the UK, so why he's brought back, I don't know. Probably the best thing about this episode is the idea of the British government using Daleks as weapons. That's pretty interesting, and I enjoy the scene when the Daleks betray the humans and exterminate the Prime Minister. I thought that was a really good moment. The companions, you've got Ryan, you've got Graham, you've got Yaz, once again, they don't do loads in this episode. I mean, this was the start of the Phasmin stuff where Captain Jack has a conversation with Yaz about the Doctor and being with the Doctor. And it just kind of comes out from nowhere. There was no real hint in Series 12 that Yaz had a crush on the Doctor. But after this episode, Yaz has apparently always had a crush on the Doctor. So yeah, I don't get why that became part of her character. I don't agree with it whatsoever. Like I said, we have Captain Jack in this episode. John Barrowman, he's probably the standout. I really do like him. He's very charismatic, and this era of Doctor Who was lacking that kind of charismatic lead. So I think Barrowman, he's great as Captain Jack. He knows how to portray this character. And he does have some good chemistry with the 13th Doctor, I have to admit. But this episode tends to fall apart in the final act. We get this elite death squad of Daleks come down and exterminate all the human-made Daleks. And then they're easily defeated because the Doctor tricks them into another TARDIS, and then the TARDIS collapses in on itself, killing all the Daleks in the process. It's a bit of a cop-out ending, and I don't really like it that much. Now, obviously, this episode sees the departure of companions Graham and Ryan. And actually, on rewatch, I did enjoy their departure. I think there's a touching conversation between the Doctor and Ryan, where Ryan's just like, having been back on Earth for 11 months, I've met up with my dad, I've met up with mates again, I actually kind of like being back. I thought that was quite a good reason for Ryan to leave the TARDIS. The fact that he just wants a normal life. He wants to move on now. He doesn't want to escape and go into space and time anymore. He just wants to live on Earth as a normal person with a normal life. I found that quite interesting. And I like how Graham decides to join him because obviously Ryan's family. Graham wants to be with Ryan more than he wants to travel with the Doctor in the TARDIS. So I did enjoy their departure on rewatch. It actually was quite heartwarming seeing them both leave the TARDIS and live their own lives on Earth. But for the most part, Revolution of the Daleks, it was a letdown. The human-made Daleks I thought was the most interesting part of the episode, but once you get the Elite Death Squad Daleks come in, I kind of switch off because it then just becomes a generic Dalek plot, which we've seen millions of times in the revival. So in conclusion, Doctor Who Series 12 had potential, but was disappointing. Now, there are some episodes in Series 12 which I love. Spyfall is a great opening premiere. You've then got Can You Hear Me and The Haunting of Villa Diodati, probably my favourite from the 13th Doctor's era as a whole. But then you've got some really bad episodes as well. You've got Orphan 55, Nikola Tesla's Night of Terror, Praxeus. You have some really dodgy episodes as much as you have some strong ones. And plus the series arc about the Timeless Child, I just don't enjoy it. You know, Fugitive of the Judoon is an episode literally just dedicated to setting up the idea of a incarnation of the Doctor that we didn't know about in Joe Martin's Fugitive Doctor. And by the time the Timeless Children comes around, they just don't do anything with it. They just kind of reveal it and then that's it. We know less actually about who the Fugitive Doctor is. You know, was the Fugitive Doctor part of the Division, or was she after that? Was she before it? No one knows. No one has a clue. So where this series really falls apart is with the series arc, because I just think that the Timeless Child series arc, it doesn't work. And that's such a shame, because Series 12 has so much promise. You know, Jodie Whittaker, she's a lot more comfortable in the role of the 13th Doctor than she was in Series 11. And they actually do some decent work with the companions this series, which they didn't do in Series 11. But for the most part, Series 12 was a disappointing series of Doctor Who. So thanks for watching, guys. I really do hope you enjoyed this review. Please remember to like, comment and subscribe in order to receive great and maybe even improved quality content in the future. Now, we've done Series 12 and as I said, it was better than Series 11 but still very disappointing. So next we're going to be moving on to Series 13. Now, do I think that's better? Well, you're going to have to wait and see. So I hope you have a good day and I will see you in another one. See ya!